cause these abnormalities. They only amplify the abnormalities established by carbohydrate consumption. So the number one cause for heart disease, for instance, in the U.S. is not high cholesterol. It's nice to think that way for the drug companies, but the number one cause by a long stretch in the U.S. of heart disease and stroke is an excess quantity of small LDL particles. Well, there's only two ways to get small LDL particles. One, a genetic susceptibility, and two, carbohydrate consumption. All the fats do, like butter and oils, is to raise the number a little bit more once the carbohydrates set that process in motion. So the fats do not have a causative role. They might have, at worst, a facilitating role. The primary cause is carbohydrate exposure. Now, it's not all carbohydrates because we have a hierarchy of good and bad among carbohydrates, but the worst of the worst, wheat, because of the amylopectin A. So this effect on heart disease is caused by amylopectin A. And by the way, gluten-free foods, likewise. So it's carbohydrates that underlie the explosion in heart disease as well as diabetes. The fats have virtually no role. That's a bit of an oversimplification because there is genetic variation among humans that vary their sensitivity to fats. But speaking generally, total fat intake, saturated fat intake have no role in causing heart disease whatsoever, unless you cut them back, in which case you replace those calories with carbohydrates. That's when it takes on importance. But humans, Americans, should not be cutting their total fat intake. If anything, they should be increasing it.
So people get rid of whole wheat bread, bagels, cereals, pancakes, and waffles. What if they want to eat corn tortillas with their meals?
Well, you raise another issue, and that is the importance of restricting total carbohydrates. There's a very, very important aspect to the wheat conversation to be aware of, and that is if I stop eating wheat and I stop taking in the gliadin protein of wheat that amplifies appetite and calorie intake, I don't want any more wheat. I want less carbohydrates. So there's a natural reduction in calorie, but specifically carbohydrate intake when I go wheat-free. Now, but what if a person says, well, I'm going to be wheat-free. I'm going to eat ice cream and jelly beans all day. Well, that's not good either. So there is a need to not overexpose yourself to carbohydrates. So second, after eliminating, some people, by the way, Kim, lots of people actually do just fine. They do just fine with perfect metabolic markers and ideal weight if all they do in diet is cut wheat and eat real foods. Eat avocados and guacamole and olive oil and meats and chicken and vegetables. Many people do just fine. But we have such a world filled with obesity, overweight, diabetes, prediabetes, that removing wheat may not fully provide the unraveling of all those effects. Those people will get better faster by further restricting all carbohydrates. So that includes things made of corn meal or corn starch and sugars, fruits, buckwheat, millet, non-wheat grains. So there are many people who still have to, if they want full health, ideal health, have to cut back total carbohydrates after even cutting out the wheat.
That's a great point. Now, I have a little more of a complex question. Let's talk about beef and chicken and the fact that they may have been fed wheat products that we want to stay away from. What do we do?
Well, as you know, the whole factory farming issue and the industrialization of farm animals is yet another problem. Those animals are often fed corn, cheap feed, and that tends to cause a different kind of fat composition, not to mention the fat that serves as a repository for growth hormone and antibiotics. So we have to be careful where we get our meat from. By the way, I'm a former vegetarian. I don't like meat very much, but I think meat consumption is perfectly compatible with human health. Yeah,
I do too. I'm glad you're saying that.
People often hear that I was a vegetarian. They think I'm trying to blast meat eaters. I'm not. I don't personally care for meat that much. But I do think if people want to have a steak and eat the fat, they should. If they want to have their salmon, wild salmon, and eat the skin, go ahead. If they want to have chicken, eat the skin, go right ahead. It's perfectly fine for most people. But unfortunately, this whole issue is clouded by the fact that commercial food production in livestock often comes from a large warehouse, 55,000 chickens stacked 6 high, wings and beaks clipped, fed on a conveyor belt.
Terrible.
Corn.
Terrible. Oh.
Yeah. So that animal, if you eat it, ideally you wouldn't, but if you do, that fat you might not want. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with fat. It has to do with the way that animal was raised. But that animal raised in an industrial setting like that, not only is the fat a repository for bad things, it's also rich in linoleic acid, that is the omega-6 fraction of oils. Most Americans, as you know, are highly overexposed to the omega-6 linoleic fraction of fats, such as that in soybean oil, corn oil, mixed vegetable oil, safflower, and sunflower oils. So we don't want to make it worse by eating factory farm-raised livestock.
So where do you get your chickens or your beef?
Well, for me, it's easy. I don't eat that much of it. So I try to seek out the free-range, organic sourced animals. You might get a small piece at Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. I live in a city, so we can also get it from local producers. For me, it's not that big a deal because I don't eat that much of it. But that's what people would have to do. They'll have to either get acquainted with a farmer, if such a thing is possible, if you live in a suburban or semi-rural area. Thankfully, some of the retailers are making it a little bit more accessible. So it does require some effort, just like going to your farmer's market. It's not as easy as going to the local supermarket. But, even some of the big chains are starting to at least claim they have better cuts of meat produced under more humane conditions. Now, what is really being sold is another question. Of course, you've heard these stories about free-range chickens and eggs from free-range chickens, when free-range only means there's a door at the end of the coop.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we have that problem. They're not really free-range. They have the potential for free-range, but they're not. So we have to be careful about what's being called free-range or organic or grass-fed.
You've made other distinctions in the book about other carbohydrates that increase blood sugar. You said use ground flaxseed as a hot cereal, for example, as a form of breading, also for chicken and fish. What else do you use for breading for chicken and fish?
That's a real handy one. You'll have to spice it up, of course.
Right.
Ground nuts can serve as a flour, but you'll find that it really needs to be dialed up a lot because it has this bland taste. Coconut flour is very versatile. I made my Thanksgiving turkey, and I thickened up the drippings with coconut flour. I added a teaspoon at a time. You wait a minute for it to absorb. And it not only did it make a nice gravy, Kim, it made a much more delicious gravy than wheat flour or cornstarch. I did add some onion powder and garlic powder. And
Me too. I had it in my turkey.
It's quite, in fact, I like this a lot better than standard gravy. If I have or someone sensitive to the effects has conventional gravy, you're going to have a sky-high blood sugar for 24 hours. You're going to trigger the number one cause for heart disease, small LDL particles, for a week. You may have joint pains, arthritis, asthma, depending what your specific susceptibility is to the wheat effect. If you and I reconfigure that simple gravy and use coconut flour instead, none of that happens. No weight gain, no blood sugar, no small LDL, no pain. You can enjoy your gravy and your turkey and be done with it. So there's many wonderful ways to recreate foods without all those destructive ingredients, such as this thing created by geneticists, wheat.
When you first came into this awareness and you started to put the pieces together, did you get nervous that you may be up against the agribusiness in a profound way? I
was, but you know what dominates my day, Kim, is seeing what happens to people. So I do this in my practice. I do this online through my online heart disease prevention program. But when you see, I saw a guy just an hour ago who lost 62 pounds in 1 year. All he did was cut wheat and avoid junk carbs. His measures of things that cause heart disease, like small LDL, his value dropped from 2,000 to 200 with no drugs. So we're not talking about piling drugs on people. He dropped from a pre-diabetic to confidently non-pre-diabetic. He feels great. People are complimenting him on how he looks. He's off blood pressure medicine. So I see this from the street level, where I see incredible turnarounds in health, losing weight, reversing diabetes, relief from asthma, acid reflux disappearing.